Was she about to lose everything her father built, all because she refused to ask for help? Tessa Morgan raised the axe again, but her arms shook so badly she could barely hold it steady. The sound of wood splitting echoed across the dry Montana plains as sweat rolled down her face. The late afternoon sun burned hot on her back, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Winter was coming, and she had no one but herself to rely on now. Tessa was only 22, yet life had forced her to grow up fast. Her father had died just 3 months ago, leaving her alone to run their ranch. The year was 1885, and the West was a hard place, especially for a woman living alone. Neighbors whispered that she wouldn't last the winter. Some even came by pretending to, quote, check on her, only to offer to buy her land for cheap. She knew they were waiting for her to fail. "I'll show them," Tessa said under her breath as she split another log. "This is my home." Her arms trembled from exhaustion. She had cut wood all morning, fixed the chicken coop in the afternoon, and now she was trying to finish before sunset. Her stomach growled. She had only taken a cup of coffee since dawn. But she forced herself to keep going. If she didn't prepare enough firewood, the nights would be brutal. The air around her twisted as dark spots clouded her vision. She blinked hard, swayed, and the axe slipped from her hands. The world tilted, and she fell to the ground. Everything went dark. Across the fence line, Brock Callahan spotted movement near the old Morgan ranch. He slowed his horse and watched the young woman swing the axe again and again. He had heard Henry Morgan's daughter was trying to run the ranch alone after her father's passing, but he hadn't thought much about it. Most women sold their land within weeks. They usually couldn't handle frontier life without a husband or family. But this woman, something about the way she worked caught his eye. She wasn't quitting. She wasn't crying. She was fighting for that land like it meant everything to her. Then she collapsed. Brock didn't hesitate. He kicked his horse into a gallop and rode straight to her. He jumped down before the animal even stopped and hurried to her side. Her skin was pale beneath the dust, her chestnut hair loose from its braid, and her breath came shallow but steady. Brock gently rolled her onto her back. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked. Tessa's eyes fluttered open. Her vision was blurry, and she tried to sit up too fast. Brock placed a steady hand behind her back. "Easy, you passed out," he said. She felt heat rush to her cheeks. He was one of the neighboring ranchers. She had seen him in town a few times. Tall, quiet, always in a worn brown hat. People said Brock Callahan worked harder than any man in the county and spoke only when needed. "I'm fine," she insisted, embarrassed. "Just lost my balance." He looked at her raw, calloused hands, at the blister forming on her palm. He glanced at the woodpile, impressive for one person alone, and then back at her tired face. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "I had coffee this morning." "Coffee isn't food," he said bluntly. He stood and looked around at the property. The fence was broken. The barn roof sagged. The corral was empty. Too much for one person, especially with winter close. "You're killing yourself," he said plainly. "It's my ranch," she snapped, pushing herself to her feet even as her knees wobbled. "I can handle it." He watched her steady herself, stubbornness burning in her eyes. "Miss Morgan," he said, surprising her by using her name, "this land will break you if you try to handle it alone." She folded her arms, ready to defend herself again, but he spoke first. "Let me shoulder this with you." The words were simple, but they hit her harder than exhaustion. Tessa stared at him, unsure if she heard right. "Why would you help me? Are you trying to buy my land too? Because I'm not selling." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Got plenty of land of my own, not here to take yours, winter's coming. Neighbors help neighbors. That's how folks survive out here." She hesitated. Pride told her to refuse, but her shaking legs told her the truth. She needed help. "I don't need charity," she said carefully. "It's not charity," he replied, picking up the axe she dropped. "Call it an investment. Your father had the best horse bloodline in the territory. Would be ashamed to lose it because you're too stubborn to accept a helping hand." She narrowed her eyes. "What do you want in return?" "First foal come spring," he answered. It was a fair deal, more than fair. Her father's breeding horses were prized across Montana. She still had the stallion and mare. though most others had been sold to pay debts. If she could make it through winter, she could rebuild. "Fine," she said at last, lifting her chin and extending her hand. "We have a deal, Mr. Callahan." He took her hand in his large, calloused one. His grip was firm, steady. "Brock," he corrected. "If we're working together, use my name." "Tessa," she replied, pulling her hand back quickly when she realized she held his longer than needed. "Go inside and eat," Brock said. "I'll finish the wood." She wanted to argue, but she had no strength left. With one last look at him, she walked to the small house, feeling his gaze follow her. Inside, she leaned against the door, breathing hard. Had she just made a deal with the devil, or found someone who truly wanted to help? Outside, Brock swung the axe with strong, practiced strikes. He didn't stop until the sun dipped behind the hills. He stacked enough wood for several days, took care of his horse, then walked to her door and knocked. Tessa opened it, looking much better after eating and resting. "Would you like some coffee before you leave?" she asked politely. "Appreciate it," he said, stepping in. Her home was neat, but nearly empty. She had sold valuables to stay afloat. Only the essentials remained. She poured him coffee and sat across from him. "I'll be back tomorrow," Brock said. "Roof needs patching. Fences need fixing." "I said I can manage." He cut her off, eyes calm and firm. "We made a deal. I'll be here in the morning." With that, he set his cup down, tipped his hat, and left. Tessa watched from the window as he rode into the night. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but something told her life had just changed. The next morning, Brock arrived just after sunrise with tools and supplies. Fresh morning air carried the smell of frost, warning that winter was creeping closer each day. His horse carried a pack full of nails, roofing materials, and fence wire. Tessa stepped outside, her hair neatly braided, and her father's old work shirt pulled over her dress. "You didn't need to bring supplies," she said, a little uneasy. "I have some." "Not enough," he replied calmly as he tied his horse to the post. "Let's start with the barn roof. Storm signs are showing." "Huh." Tessa followed him to the barn. Inside were her most prized possessions. Midnight, the black stallion with a proud stance, and Aurora, the chestnut mare with gentle eyes. Even with the ranch falling apart, Tessa had kept the horses clean, fed, and cared for. She would sacrifice anything before letting them go hungry. Brock examined the horses with the eye of a man who knew animals well. He moved slowly, letting Midnight sniff his hand before touching him. Tessa watched closely, protective but curious. "Your father was right about their bloodline," Brock said, checking Aurora's legs. "Fine horses, worth fighting for." A tiny smile tugged at Tessa's lips. Compliments for her horses were compliments to her father's legacy. "They're all I have left of him." Brock stood and looked at her differently then. Not just the stubborn girl trying to survive. He saw the grief behind her strength. "How did he die?" he asked gently. Tessa's eyes lowered. "Thrown from a customer's horse. Not one of his. It wasn't broken right. He hit his head. He hung on for 2 days, and then," she swallowed, trying to push the memory away. "Then it was just me." Brock nodded, feeling her pain as if it touched his own past. "I lost my father too, pneumonia, 3 winters back." They shared a quiet moment of understanding. Two people shaped by loss. Brock stepped back and pointed at the roof. "Let's get started." They worked through the morning. Brock climbed the barn roof, hammering in new shingles, while Tessa passed him tools and held the ladder steady. He worked with focus and calm, never wasting a movement. Tessa admired the way he moved. Not showy, not loud, just sure and steady. By noon, the barn roof was repaired. They moved to the house roof next. Tessa's stomach growled, but she didn't mention it. She wanted to prove she could pull her weight. Brock noticed anyway. "Lunch," he said firmly. Inside, Tessa served beans, cornbread, and dried apple slices. Simple food, but she offered it proudly. They ate together on the porch, comfortable silence settling between them as they watched the broad plains stretch out to the horizon. "How long have you been running the Circle C?" Tessa asked after a while. 8 years now, he answered. Took it over at 20 when Pa died. My older brother stayed for a while, then left for California. You run that whole place alone? She asked with surprise. He shrugged. Good ranch hands help, but the weight of it is mine. She understood that better than most. When they finished eating, they worked again until the sun hung low. A cold wind swept across the plains, carrying the smell of rain. Brock looked at the sky. Storm's coming sooner than I thought. Bring the horses in tonight. Will you make it back before it hits? Tessa asked before she could stop herself. The concern in her voice surprised them both. I'll manage, he said, tipping his hat. See you tomorrow. He rode off, and Tessa watched him go longer than she meant to. Why did it feel like the ranch grew quieter the moment he left? That night, the storm hit hard. Wind howled around the house. Tessa lay awake, listening for leaks in the roof. It held. Brock's work was solid. She felt a strange comfort, knowing he had helped secure her home. The next morning, fresh mud covered the ground. Tessa expected Brock might stay on his ranch to handle the storm damage there. But just past sunrise, there he was again, leading a workhorse dragging a wagon full of fence posts and wire. You came back, she said, unable to hide her surprise. Fence won't fix itself, he replied simply. They spent the day repairing the north fence line. Snow clung to the mountains in the distance. Winter was getting close enough to touch. Days turned to weeks. Brock came every morning, worked the ranch as if it were his own, and left only when chores were done. They repaired fences, patched walls, stacked firewood, and rebuilt damaged pens. Tessa learned he was engaged once, to a banker's daughter from Helena. She left after one winter, unable to handle ranch life. Brock spoke of it without anger, just truth. Tessa shared about her mother, who died when she was 8, leaving her to grow up in a man's world with only her father to guide her. One evening, after sealing the barn for the night, Brock turned to her with a serious look. Winter's coming strong, he said. Your barn's decent, but mine's better sheltered. You and the horses should stay at my place until spring. Tessa froze. Stay at your ranch? That would be improper. People would talk. They'll think you're a hired hand for the winter, he said calmly. I've got a separate cabin for ranch workers. You'd have your own space. No, she replied firmly. This is my home. I won't leave it. Brock held her gaze for a long moment. It's not giving up your home to stay alive through winter. Her jaw set stubbornly. I'm staying. He tipped his hat, frustration tightening his jaw. Suit yourself. See you tomorrow. He rode off before she could respond, leaving her standing in the cold, heart racing with confusion. Why did her chest feel tight when he left angry? The next day brought the season's first heavy snow. Fat flakes drifted down, coating the ranch. Tessa was shocked when Brock arrived again, snow-dusting his coat. He brought supplies, extra feed, blankets, and dry wood. You shouldn't have traveled in this, she said. He shrugged. Storm's building. We prepare today. They worked faster than usual, checking the barn, storing hay inside, sealing windows, and lining door cracks. The wind picked up as daylight faded. Snow began swirling fast. You should head home, Tessa said, heart pounding. It's getting bad. Quote, Too late, Brock said, looking toward the white fog rolling across the plains. Trail's gone. I'd lose my way. You're stuck here, she whispered. Looks that way. The storm raged. Brock would have to stay the night inside her home. One night. Alone. Together. Her reputation would not survive this. You can take my father's room, she said stiffly. Brock nodded with respect. Thank you. I'll check the barn before we turn in. The wind screamed that night, as if trying to tear the house apart. They ate stew by lamplight, the fire barely keeping the cold away. When Tessa went to check the horses, Brock insisted on going with her. Outside, the wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Brock grabbed her around the waist to keep her steady. Snow hit their faces hard, but inside the barn, the horses stood safe. On the way back, the storm battered them. Brock held her close, shielding her with his body. By the time they reached the house, both were shaking. Inside, they warmed by the fire. Tessa looked at him, breath unsteady. The storm outside felt far less dangerous than the feeling growing inside her. The storm raged through the night, shaking the small house, but inside, the fire glowed warm. Brock stayed on the far side of the room while Tessa prepared her father's room for him. She set fresh linens on the bed and placed a lamp by the nightstand. "You'll be comfortable here," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Thank you," Brock replied. He stepped inside the room but paused, understanding the trust she was giving him. Her father's room still held his boots, his coat, his Bible. It felt like sacred ground. "Good night, Tessa," he said. "Good night." Tessa returned to her own room, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay awake listening to the wind, the house creaking, and the strange awareness that someone else was under her roof. She had lived alone for months. Tonight, she didn't feel alone. Strangely, she didn't mind it. By morning, the storm had stopped. Snow piled nearly halfway up the windows, turning the world bright and silent. Tessa wrapped a shawl around herself and stepped into the kitchen to find Brock already awake, warming his hands by the stove. A pot of coffee sat heating. "Morning," he said. "Morning. I checked on the horses. They're fine. Snow's deep, though. We're not going anywhere for a day or two." Tessa wasn't sure how she felt about that, relieved or nervous. They settled into a rhythm. Brock chopped wood, shoveled snow from the door, and carried water from the well. Tessa tended to the horses, cooked, and kept the fire strong. At night, they sat by the fire to keep warm. She mended clothes, while he carved small wooden figures with his pocket knife. On the second evening, Tessa noticed he was shaping a horse out of wood. His large hands moved with gentle care. "You're good at that," she said softly. "Helps pass the time," he answered. "Grandfather taught me. Said idle hands get a man in trouble." She smiled. "I like it. It's peaceful." Brock studied her for a moment. "You remind me of him. He always said the measure of a person is how they face hardship." Her heart warmed. "Your grandfather sounds wise." He would have respected you, Tessa. You don't back down from life." Silence settled, but it was warm, not awkward. The next day, the snow began to melt enough for Brock to clear a path. By afternoon, he could return to his ranch. As he saddled his horse, Tessa stood nearby, arms crossed tight, not from the cold, but something harder to admit. "You'll come back?" she asked quietly. Brock paused, one hand on the saddle horn. "Of course, we made a deal, and there's still work to be done." She nodded, hiding the small wave of relief that washed over her. "I'll see you then." Soon, the snow melted enough for him to travel back and forth again. Their routine returned, but something had shifted between them. They worked side by side, shared meals, and talked more freely. Tessa found herself looking forward to his knock on the door each morning. Weeks passed. November turned to December. The ranch was stronger than when Brock first arrived. Fences repaired, barns secured, wood stacked high. Aurora, the mare, showed signs of carrying a foal. One evening, Brock came inside after a long day of repairs. After supper, he reached into his pocket. "I made something for you," he said, placing a small wooden horse on the table. It looked exactly like midnight. Tessa picked it up carefully. "It's beautiful. Thank you." He held her gaze, voice low. "Wanted you to have something to remember this winter by?" She looked at him, heart unsteady. "I won't forget." As Christmas neared, Brock surprised her with a neatly wrapped bundle, an elegant wool shawl in deep blue, softer and finer than anything she owned. "Brock, this is too much." "It's a courting gift," he said in a steady voice. "First one?" Her breath caught. Courtship. He had spoken it plain. Her cheeks warmed, but she didn't refuse. Instead, she draped it around her shoulders. "It's lovely. Thank you." Their courtship grew slowly, built on respect, shared work, and quiet moments. Brock was patient, never pushing, always steady. He visited often, sometimes joining her for supper. The ranch no longer felt silent. It felt alive. Christmas morning, he arrived early, bringing an extra horse so she could ride with him to the Circle C Ranch for Christmas dinner. His foreman and wife welcomed her warmly. They shared a meal full of laughter, music, and warmth. That night, standing with her by a small lit tree, Brock spoke softly. "Tessa, I'm not asking for an answer now, but when spring comes, would you consider joining our ranches as husband and wife?" Her heart stopped. She met his eyes. He was serious, honest, steady. Asking her to choose a life with him, she swallowed. "I'll think about it, Brock. Truly." Winter turned to spring. Their partnership continued. The foal was born. A strong chestnut colt with long legs and a bright spirit. "What will you name him?" Brock asked, as they watched him stand for the first time. Tessa smiled. "Promise. Because he is full of promise." Weeks later, with spring in full bloom, Tessa stood before Brock on a quiet evening, her hands trembling slightly. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." Brock pulled her close, emotion softening his features. "You sure?" Quote, "I am," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. "As long as we run both ranches, I'm not giving up my land." Brock chuckled. "Wouldn't want you to." Their wedding was simple, held on the porch of the Circle C Ranch in late April. Neighbors gathered, music played, and laughter filled the air. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Brock kissed her gently, but full of promise, just like the life ahead of them. Years later, Tessa watched Brock lead their young son on a pony in the yard. A second child grew under her heart. The ranches thrived, stronger together than apart. She had not lost her independence. She had gained a partner who never tried to take it from her. Brock came to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Happy?" he asked. She leaned into him. "More than I ever dreamed." Together, they looked at the land around them, the same land she once nearly lost from fighting alone. She smiled at her husband. "Thank you for shouldering this life with me." "Always," Brock said, kissing her forehead. Sometimes love didn't arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it began with a simple offer spoken under a fading sky. "Let me shoulder this with you."